Well, good morning. Please pray with me. Father, this morning I pray that you'll give us ears to hear, minds to think, hearts that are receptive to what you're going to teach us today. Amen. Normally, when we think about creation, we think about it through God's eyes. But what was Satan thinking when he first saw creation? You ever think about that? He must have hated it. And why? Because it was good. God said it was very good. Satan just couldn't leave it alone. He had to mess it up because he doesn't like good. So how did he do it? Was it with a love of money? No. Was it with idolatry? No, I didn't try that either. Was it with sex, drugs, and rock and roll? No, and no. He didn't try any of those things. Instead, he asked a question. Did God really say? Think about that. Did God really say? What was his angle? He was trying to get Adam and Eve to mistrust God's word. He was trying to erode their confidence in what God had told them, even as they were walking face to face in the garden together. You know what? It worked. He succeeded at getting Adam and Eve to not only question God's word, but actually think that they could be their own gods, that they had the ability and the right to decide what's right and wrong. The minute that they accepted his lie, they were putty in his hands. Well, Satan's been using this lie ever since. He uses it with me. He uses it with you. He uses it with everyone, okay? Mind you, he doesn't walk up to them and say, hey, I'm Satan, and I want you to mistrust God's word. Yeah, he doesn't do that. He uses erosion and surrogates. Now, what do I mean by erosion? I saw some videos of rock crushers. They'll take these big, huge boulders, they'll stick them in these rock crushers, and in seconds, these things are just ground into little pebbles. Well, erosion doesn't work that way. Erosion takes a lot of time. A little wind, a little water, more wind, more water, and sooner or not, that same boulder gets ground into sand. But where do you think all the sand in the desert comes from? It's not rock crushers, it's erosion. And he uses the same thing with us. What do I mean by surrogates? Well, your coworker comes to you and says, hey, I just saw this TV documentary, and it proves that the Bible's full of errors. Your friend comes to you and says, there's so many religions in the world, and they all have their own kind of, you could call them Bibles. Well, which one's right? Or aren't they all right? Or are any of them right? And you're sitting there going, how do I answer that one? Your relative comes to you and says, the Bible is just a book written by people that were in power and trying to use it to have power over other people. I'm sure you've heard the line, it's going around of late. Victors get to rewrite history. And they say, well, that's just what the Bible is. Or someone else comes along and says, the Bible's full of all these repressive ideas that are used to push down minorities and women and other people. So how can you trust it? Why can't you believe in it? See, over and over, our culture in all kinds of places, even TV, has its own idea of what the Bible is and what we should get from it. And we don't, it's not like a class that we take. But it's all these little drip, 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 drip in our lives. We don't even pay attention to, but the next thing you know, that boulder is crumbling. And the boulder is like the foundation of our faith. And every time that Satan just chips away at it, it's like he's chipping away at the foundation of our little personal houses of faith. The house, at a glance, the house might look good, but underneath it, he's constantly eroding and chipping. And just, what it does is it makes us vulnerable and at risk of our faith just being messed up. We don't see it, but he's doing it all day long. And I don't want that to happen to any of us, where he gets away with it. See, it's not enough for us to know what we believe. And we're going to work on that. But we also need to know why we believe it. Okay? And if you know why you believe it, then when these questions come and these little drip, drip, drips happen, you go, oh, I've seen that drip before. I know what that is. And I've already got my drip guard up for that one. What I want to do today, my goal, is that you walk out of here more confident than ever that God's word really is God's word. Okay? Now, we're not alone in this challenge. The apostles and the people of their day faced the same questions, the same attacks from the devil. So we can learn from them. How they responded can help us and how we can respond. So I want you to turn with me to 2 Peter chapter 1, starting at verse 16. Could you all rise for the reading of God's word? 2 Peter chapter 1, starting at verse 16. Peter writes, "For we did not follow cleverly devised myths, when we made known to you the power and the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. But we were eyewitnesses of his majesty. For when he received honor and glory from God the Father, and the voice was borne to him by the majestic glory, 'This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased,' we ourselves heard this very voice from heaven, for we were with him on the holy mountain. And we have something more sure, the prophetic word, to which you will do well to pay attention, as to a lamp shining in a dark place until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts. Knowing this, first of all, that no prophecy of Scripture comes from someone's own interpretation. For no prophecy was ever produced by the will of men, but men spoke from God as they were carried along by the Holy Spirit." Please be seated. Peter writes that they did not follow cleverly devised myths when he told them about our Lord Jesus Christ. Cleverly devised myths. Why did he bring this up? Well, he brought it up because people were dismissing the good news that he was bringing to them as mere myth. You know, a made-up story. Let's be realistic. The story of Jesus is a whopper. Now listen to me. Okay, that's what the coworkers and friends and relatives back then thought. And let's turn the clock back 2,000 years and kind of listen to kind of what they might have said about the gospel. Romans, they would have said something like this. Hey, you know, the Romans claim that the emperor is God, right? But who really believes that? So at least the Roman emperor's alive, this Jesus of yours is dead. You know, how can a dead man be a god? And on top of that, the Romans, they don't crucify gods. I mean, how could a god die on a cross, right? So how could this Jesus that died as a criminal on the cross possibly be a god? Come on. And besides, people aren't gods. People are people. Let's be realistic here. And, why in the world should we worship somebody who is a criminal? That kind of makes sense. And then they would ask, and who's telling you this? Wait. You say one of these guys was a tax collector? Who wants to believe one of them? And the other guys, they're just running all over the place, preaching just so they can collect money from you. That's their real game. And wait a second, one of the guys, a couple of the guys that are telling us about this were fishermen. You know what kind of stories they tell, right? Well, do you see what I mean? I mean, the story of Jesus really is, at the face of it, a fantastic tale. People then were calling it myths, and people are calling it myths today. Well, how did Peter respond to these challenges? He didn't hide from them. He faced them head on. So let's look at 2 Peter 1, 16 and 17. A little closer. He says, "We did not follow cleverly devised myths, but we were eyewitnesses." He's saying this didn't come out of us, it came to us. Okay? This isn't something that we concocted, something that we just dreamt up in our imagination, wrote it down. I understand that Scientology started because somebody bet L. Ron Hubbard that he couldn't invent a religion. And so he wrote a big fat book inventing a religion, and people have followed it ever since. Amazing when you hear the origin of that. And people were saying something like that about the apostles and the gospel. Peter says, no. This isn't something that came out of us. It's something that came to us. And we were just merely witnesses. We saw what happened, and we're repeating to you what we saw. That's all that's going on here. Now, this is Peter's assertion. That doesn't necessarily make it a fact. So to see if it is fact, we need to apply the beyond reasonable doubt test, right? You go into court, and the judge tells the jury, in order to convict this person, in order to say, yes, this is what really happened, what the prosecutor's trying to say, you have to prove it beyond reasonable doubt. And so we can use that same test when it comes to looking at the Gospels. So what's that going to look like here when you apply it to a myth? In order for a clever myth to work, it has to be designed in a way that it looks like something that's true. It has to look believable. Because if it's not believable enough, who's going to bite? Right? It's got to make sense to the reader. I'm here to tell you the Gospels fail that myth test. Okay, it's good to know the Gospels fail at something, right? They fail at the myth test. And how do they do that? With the Jews expected a military and political victor, right? The kind of Messiah that they were expecting was all about military and politics. And they didn't get the conquering hero that they were looking for. It's not what Jesus came to do. As far as all the other people in the world, the gospel fails this test with them too. What Roman would follow a leader who had died? Okay? How do you follow a dead man? And then people of that day, they didn't accept the testimony of women because it was in court, because it was considered as unreliable. Sorry, ladies. You've come a long way. Okay? Back then, they just wouldn't believe you about anything. Okay? And so why in the world would you put women in the Bible as prominently as they're put, especially in the New Testament? And in fact, women are the very first eyewitnesses of Jesus' resurrection. Now, why would you put something like that into a Bible that you want people to believe? Okay? The Gospels, and then let's talk about how do the Gospels treat the apostles? The Gospels document that the apostles were bumbling, fumbling, petty, just jealous and foolish people. Okay? But these are supposed to be the leaders that you're supposed to follow now that Jesus is dead? Okay? Who's gonna follow that? And not only that, but worst of all, there's Peter who denied Jesus. Why follow him? Why listen to what that man says? See, if you're writing clever myths, you're not going to do that. Okay, you wouldn't include all that material. It just doesn't make sense to anyone in that way if you're devising a myth. Now, if you're just saying, this is what happened, then you put it in because it happened and you're just being truthful. And like it or not, good, bad, and ugly, it's what you write down because it's what you saw and heard. You see, can you agree with me that the Bible fails the myth test? Okay? Now, on the other hand, what Peter asserts, that he and others were eyewitnesses. So does the Apostle John. And please turn with me to John's first letter, 1 John chapter 1. John writes this: that which was from the beginning, which we heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked on, which we have touched with our hands, concerning the word of life, the life was made manifest. That means you could see it. It wasn't hidden behind some cloud or somewhere over there. No, it was in front of their face. Okay? And we have seen it, we testify to it, and proclaim to you the eternal life which was with the Father, and he was made manifest to us, that word again. That which we have seen and heard, we proclaim also to you. Heard, seen, touched. And then he doubles down and repeats it. John's not playing around here. If he were texting today, you know what he would have done with this? It would have been in all caps, right? Kind of like shouting. So not only were the gospel writers and the writers of the epistles eyewitnesses, they also named the names of other eyewitnesses. Mark 15, verse 21. Mark names not only the name of the person who helped Jesus carry the cross, Simon of Cyrene, but Mark records by listing of Cyrene, he's telling you where he's from. He gave you his address. He goes beyond that and gives you the name of his two sons. Now, first century storytellers, myth writers, didn't do this. Now, historical novel writers today, you go out and you buy a paperback that's a historical fiction novel. Oh, they'll do that. That's what we do now, but it's not what they did then. And what Mark and the other gospel writers are inviting the readers to do is fact check. They're saying, hey, if you want to, just get on the donkey, go down the road, and when you get to Cyrene, look up Rufus or Alexander, and go to them and say, hey, Rufus, are you really Cyrene's son? Yeah, you are? Okay, I got a question for you. Did your father really carry the cross for Jesus? Okay. The writers were inviting people to do that. And it wasn't just Mark. Here's another one. Paul, when he's writing to the Corinthians, he tells them that over 500 people saw Jesus after the resurrection. We're not talking about just a few oddballs. Now we got 500 people. That's 5 times as many people as are here right now. Okay? And Paul says, and most of them are still alive. You know what Paul's doing? Go check them out. Go fact check me and see if what I'm telling you is true. Okay, this is bold. And this is what they did. Now that's not the characteristic of clever myth writing. And just because there were eyewitnesses to what Jesus said and did, how do we know that they recorded his deeds and words accurately? Well, let's face it. How many of us can remember what we had for lunch on Wednesday? Okay, I don't see any hands. But we're not talking about lunch on Wednesday. I wager that if almost every one of you can tell me exactly where you were and exactly what you were doing when the screen flashed on 9/11 and you saw those planes going into those towers. You could tell me that, okay? What Jesus said and did wasn't lunch. It was like a 9/11 event. Well, a couple of examples. If you were on that boat with Jesus in the middle of that lake and the wind and the waves were rocking you all over and you were sure those waves are going to swamp the boat and you were going to drown. And Jesus goes, be still. That's all he said. Be still. The wind and the waves, they stopped, and it was smooth sailing, and the next thing you know, you're at port. Okay? You're going to remember that. And what if you were one of the people watching that crowd of 5,000 people, well, at least 5,000 men, not to mention women and children, that were hungry and needed food, and all they could come up with was a couple of fish and a few loaves of bread. Jesus blesses it. They hand it out to all the people. Everybody eats their fill. They're just sitting there going, oh my gosh. And then at the end, they collect all the leftovers, and they got piles of leftovers. You going to remember that? Of course you will. Like I said, these are not lunch. These are 9/11 events. Well, what about Jesus' words? Okay? If you've got one of those Bibles that got red letters, there's a lot of words in the Bible that Jesus said. How in the world did they remember all that stuff? Especially like the Sermon on the Mount. Who could remember that? Well, think about this. When David comes up here and preaches every Sunday, do you want to hear the same sermon every week? He's not going to give it to you every week. But if David was going from town to town, to church to church to church, and he had a sermon that was a really good sermon, that blessed people and touched people, he's going to repeat it at the next church, and the next church, and the next church, and the next church, and the next. Jesus was the ultimate traveling preacher. Okay? He was constantly on the move, constantly in new synagogues, constantly using, I'm pretty sure he used the same sermon over and over and over and over and over and over and over. And the apostles who were with him heard it over and over and over and over and over. They got to the point where they're all like, oh, this is what he's going to say next. Right? They knew what he was going to say. And then, when Jesus sends them out 2 by 2, what do you think that they were preaching when they were out, when Jesus told them to go out and preach the word? The same sermons that they had heard over and over and over. And they repeated them to the people that they went to over and over and over. So by the time it came to writing them down, it wasn't a big deal because they had heard it, they had internalized it, they knew it so well. Now, even Jesus is not going to say the exact same precise words every town he goes to. And so if you look at the Gospels and somebody says, well, he said it this way here, and the other Gospel writer says he said it that way there. See, it must be wrong. Well, maybe Matthew, when he has his record of the Sermon on the Mount, is writing it from one place, and Luke, when he's writing what is Luke's version of the Sermon on the Mount, that's a little bit different, mostly the same, but a little different. Well, it's just because it was a different town. This is not a big deal. So don't let people turn it into one. So not only did they hear the sermons over and over and have them memorized to like crazy, on top of this, Jesus says that he is going to send the Holy Spirit, and one of the jobs of the Holy Spirit is to remind the apostles of everything that he had said and done. Okay, so now we're not relying on human memory, we're relying on God the Holy Spirit to say, let's get this right. Okay, so we can have a high level of confidence that the gospel writers accurately recorded what Jesus said. They accurately recorded what Jesus did. So what have we learned up to this point? The Bible fails the myth test, but it passes the eyewitness test. And that we can reasonably rely on the words and the events that were reported right here, both the natural events and even the supernatural events, because they were recorded accurately in the first place. Now, I'm going to have to run through the next few points really quickly. So the Bible references I'm going to make in the next few minutes, they're not necessarily going to show up on the screen, but they're in your bulletins. Okay, so as a practical thing, take your bulletins and read them. Okay, or use that list of passages, because there's a lot more to look at and think about, meditate on, especially Psalm 22 and Isaiah 53. The other thing you can do is, this is kind of like the highlights version, but if you want to see the whole game, if you want to see all the detail and the analytics and stuff behind all this, come on the Friday night class. Okay? A little commercial, but it's there. So let's go back to the Bible. Let's just move on to verses 17 and 18. 2 Peter 17 and 18. Peter references the Transfiguration when he witnessed God speaking from heaven, identifying and commending Jesus as his son. This was a miracle, a supernatural event. Now, Peter could have referenced any one of a multitude of miracles, but he chose this one. He was there. Now, I'm going to make a difference between supernatural and superhuman. A Babe Ruth home run was a superhuman event. What we read in the Bible, the miracles, are supernatural. Okay? And that's part of how we know that they're from God. Because a human could do what Babe Ruth did, but no human can do what God has done. because God is supernatural, and here we are, the recipients of that. Additionally, moving on in 2 Peter 19, chapter 1, verse 19, he references prophecies. This is really important. There are over 300 prophecies in the Old Testament that and I mean detailed prophecies. Not that, there will be a Messiah, but prophecies that covered where he would be born, how he would live, what he would do, how he would die, that he'd even have a resurrection. And the part about how he would die, here's an interesting note. They describe a crucifixion. This is where I want you to focus on Psalm 22 and Isaiah 53. You will see the crucifixion in those two writings. You know what? Those prophecies were written hundreds of years before crucifixion was invented. Hundreds of years before it was invented. Nobody had ever seen a crucifixion before, and yet Isaiah and David in the Psalms and the Isaiah document these things, okay, in detail. Overall, those 300 some odd prophecies, you go through, and Jesus' life matched all of them. The statistical possibilities of that are just off the chart. Okay? You don't just have a fluke. Something happens once, that could be a fluke. But all 300 some odd prophecies line up with Jesus' life, okay. I mean, that's crazier than winning the lottery. I mean, the odds are astronomical. So what have we learned here? The New Testament documents record supernatural events and over 300 fulfilled prophecies. Moving on. In verses 20 and 21, Peter explains how God brought the Bible into existence. This is pretty important. He says that men spoke from God as they were carried along by the Holy Spirit. He claims two things happened at the same time. Men were speaking, men were writing. Okay, that's one thing. And specifically what Peter and John and Paul and Moses and David and Isaiah and all the other 40 writers of the Bible, when they wrote, what they wrote was uniquely from them. It was human. Those individuals, you can see David. You can see who wrote. Now, if you read Peter and you read Paul, you know, okay, these are two different guys. Okay? At the same time, God is speaking through them, making sure that what he wants us to hear is exactly what ended up in the Bible. Not a word more, not a word less. He wanted to make sure that we heard what he wanted us to read and follow got written. Now, take a look at this slide here. Here you go. Basically, it boils down to this. On the left, the arrow pointing up, it's speculation. Okay? If it's man's thoughts about God, that's mere speculation. And you and I can speculate all day long, all we want, and your thought is as good as my thought, as good as the thought of somebody in China, Africa, Europe, Australia. I don't care where you're from. I don't care what century you're from. Anybody's speculation about God is just as good and just as lame as the next person's. Okay? What Peter is claiming, what John was claiming, what all the gospel writers, what all the writers in the Old Testament were claiming, is that The Bible, what they're writing down was God's revelation to us. Big difference between revelation, God saying, this is who I am. Because let's face it, we're just people. How in the world can we, even with the Bible, it's hard for us to wrap our heads around who God is, right? And if we're just going to rely on what's in our head without the Bible and try to have some idea what God is, well, no wonder there's so many different religions throughout the world. Okay? Because they're all man-made. And every different man here, man, woman here, there, they could make it up. And absent the Bible, that's what they did. What God's saying is, my word to you is from me to you. Okay? That puts a whole different light on it, does it not? See, you see, the Bible is not just a collection of men's ideas or speculations. It's God's revelation about himself, about his creation, ourselves, what he has done for us, and how we should then live. And this is evidenced in 2 Timothy 3:16, John chapter 1, and how many times in the Old Testament where we read, thus saith the Lord. It's the point that the writer of Hebrews is making in chapter 1 in the very opening words of the book of Hebrews. This is what the writer says. Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke. God spoke to our fathers by the prophets, but in these last days, he has spoken to us through his Son. You see the continuity there? God's speaking. One way or the other, it's God coming down, but instead of using kind of mere humans, he now is using Jesus. He's using himself on earth to speak to us, to reveal himself to us. Now, if you keep reading Hebrews, you're going to see how Jesus is, if you look at Jesus, you're looking at God. Okay? That's what the writer of Hebrews says next. You look at Jesus, you see God. So what have we learned? The Bible is God's word. It's expressed through human authors, but it's God's revelation to us, not someone's speculation about him. And that separates the Bible from almost all the other writings of all the other religions in the world. Okay? A lot of writings are speculations about God. The Bible claims that it's God talking to us. What a difference. What a blessing. Now, one of the challenges that Peter didn't have to face is the questions about copies and translations. And how many of you people have had people point out to you, say something like, there are so many different translations. They don't say exactly the same thing. How could they possibly be right? Or maybe they saw Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code movie where he makes the point, well, there's so many copies of the Bible, and with all the copies, there's so many errors, you have no idea how many errors. There's hundreds of thousands of errors in all these copies. So how can you believe it? Well, the short answer is, the number of copies that we have is a benefit, not a problem. There's over 5,000 handwritten copies of the New Testament. Over 5,000 handwritten copies. And they're here, they're there, they're, some monastery's attic, some other monastery's basement. They're all over the place, okay? And the fact that there's so many copies helps us trace down, okay, we've got it spelled this way all these times. Oops, it's spelled that way over there. Guess what? This must be the right spelling, okay? Another thing, and this is, and people talk about, there's one guy that's running around, makes a lot of money off of saying, we don't even have the copies of the copies of the copies of the originals. We don't have the originals, and we don't even have the copies of the originals or the copies of the copies of the originals, etc. And so all we're left with is just like 10th generation copies. First of all, it's not accurate. Secondly, when some monk was asked to make a copy of the New Testament, what do you think he'd do? Well, it's the same thing you and I would do if we had to make a copy of a document at work over and over and over. Okay? Do we make a copy of the copy? No. We've got a little folder that's got the original. And we take the original and put it in the Xerox and make a copy of the original. And then we put the original back in the folder on our desk. So the next time we need to make a copy, we go back to the original, right? Okay? We've all done that. Yeah, I mean, if you've been in an office and had to make copies of stuff over and over, that's what you do. Guess what? They did too. They didn't go to the last copy they made. No, they made to the oldest copy that they had. And then they made a copy of it and said, here you go. Okay? So it's not like that old telephone game where you tell somebody who tells somebody who tells somebody who tells somebody. No. The way it worked is this: I tell you, and now you've got a copy. I tell you, and you've got a copy. I tell you, and you've got a copy. Now I tell you, and you've got a copy, and I tell you, and you've got a copy. Guess what? You're all getting it from the same place. So the authenticity, the accuracy of the copies, no matter how many they are, and how many years were spread out in between when all those copies were made, and how many different places they ended up, they all started out from the same place. Okay? So the process of copying and all the copies that we have, what it's done actually is it helps us have a more accurate understanding today of what the original documents said than what we did 500 years ago. Okay? When translators decide to sit down and make a new translation, instead of having, I think there were only 7 copies of the New Testament that the writers of the King James Bible worked with, now they've got 5,000 different copies. They can cross-check. How much more accurate can you be compared to 500 years ago? So the process of copying actually has been to our benefit, not a loss of credibility. The other thing is, what about all the translations? Well, we believe that what God wrote the very first time, what Peter wrote the first time, what Paul wrote the first time, what Mark wrote the first time, what Isaiah wrote the first time, what Jeremiah wrote the first time, those were precisely what God wanted written. We don't have the originals anymore. We've only got copies, and we have translations. Now, there isn't any document that if you translate it from one language to the next is going to be precisely accurate. That phrase, something gets lost in the translation, it's legit. And if we don't think that that's true about the Bible, then we don't understand the process of translation. The question is, how accurate can you be? And you can be really accurate. Okay? Maybe not perfect, but really accurate. And guess what? We've got, so let me explain about translations. Some translations are written with the goal, the translators have the goal of being as close to the Greek or Hebrew, not only in terms of what the words were, but even the order of the words and how the Greeks would have said it. Now, we don't talk like Greeks. We don't read like Greeks. We read like Americans, right? So there's other translators that say, that's a good idea, but for people that don't know Greek or whatever, what we're going to do is we're going to write it in a way that people understand it today. And so they still be true to what the gospel writers were writing, but they're going to write it in a way that's a little easier to read and makes more sense in 2022 to you and me, okay? Not some scholar sitting somewhere. But if you're not satisfied with that, you always have the option of going to the Greek and Hebrew because it's available. Of course, you have to learn Greek or Hebrew, but you can do that. You can do that. So, even though people try to use this thing, wow, there's so many copies, who can you know which one's right? Well, we can, as people that get paid to do nothing but figure that out. And we have so many different translations, and they're not all the same. Well, of course they're not. But that doesn't mean that they're wrong. I'll give you one exception. The New World Translation. How many of you have seen a New World Translation that maybe a Jehovah's Witness friend has tried to put in your hands? Okay? I'm going to make a warning on this one. That is not a good translation. In fact, it really wasn't written to be a translation true to the text. It was written in order to support the heresies, the false teachings of the Watchtower. And so it has, even a first-year Greek student, much less a Greek scholar, would look at that quote translation and go, oh my gosh, where'd they get that from? Okay, so that's an exception. Please don't use it. And if you know people that are relying on it, hand them a real Bible, okay? So let's review what we've learned. The Bible fails the myth test, but passes the eyewitness test. You and I can reasonably rely on the events that were reported, both natural and supernatural. Why? Because they were recorded accurately in the first place, and they've been transmitted accurately ever since. Now, the New Testament documents report the fulfillment of over 300 very specific Old Testament prophecies. The handwritten copies we have over 1,500 years add certainty to our understanding what was written in the original documents. We've learned that the Bible is God's word faithfully transmitted by human authors, and it's God's revelation to us, not someone's speculation about him. So I ask you, why do people question the Bible? When we were kids, we pestered our parents with questions, right? If you've got kids or grandkids, they're always going, what's this? Why is that? How does this work? What's going on? Tell me, okay? And parents do this. At some point they go, stop asking all these questions, okay? Now, why do kids ask those questions? Because they want to know the answers. And they will build their lives and organize their how they see the world based on the answers we give them. Okay? So tell them the truth. Okay? You don't want them coming back around later going, you lied to me. And that happens. But as adults, we often use questions in order to avoid the answers. I'll repeat that. We often use questions to avoid the answers. We hide behind our questions because we don't want to know. Because actually we kind of know that we won't like the answers. And so we ask these questions we don't expect people to answer just so we can avoid the actual answer. And we do that especially with the Bible. And why do we do it with the Bible? We do it because the Bible is a dangerous book. Later on in Hebrews chapter 4, we learn it tells us that God's word is like a super scalpel of the soul. The Bible's a disruptive book. Paul tells the Thessalonians, the first letter to the Thessalonians, he tells them that we learn that God's word changes lives in powerful ways. And we kind of don't want our lives changed that much. We kind of say we do, but half the time we don't. How many of us say we want to lose weight? Okay, I'm on that list. Put me at the top. Okay. How many of us really take the work to do what we say we want to do? Because we don't like what it would take to get there. Okay? Just speaking for myself. And we do that with the Bible. We're afraid of what the Bible says. So we hide behind questions. We hide from the Bible. See, that's because the Bible challenges our assumptions about our place in this world, both individually and collectively. It challenges our habits, our desires, our plans. It challenges our culture. It challenges our relationships. It challenges everything. There isn't a single part of our lives where God's word doesn't touch. And sometimes we don't want to be touched in those spots. Let's go back to the garden. Satan lied to Adam and Eve, saying they could be equal to God. They could be their own God. They could, and you know what? Even those of us in this room who believed the gospel, who believed God, who believed in Jesus for most all of our lives, we do that. We fall for that lie. And because a part of us wants what Eve wanted. We want to be our own gods. We want the ability to be able to read the Bible and say, yeah, I agree with this, or not so much. We want the ability to make the decisions about whether or not we want the Bible actually to kind of fit into our lives. So we pick and choose what we read that fits what we're already doing. We ignore the other stuff, okay, because that might be dangerous or disruptive. We want the ability to make the Bible fit in our lives instead of fitting our lives into what God tells us. Okay? God warned us in Genesis 2 that ignoring his words leads to death. But in Psalm 19 and in so many other places throughout the whole Bible, thanks be to God, he also promises us that his word gives life. Right? So take a look at this graphic that's going to be, here we go. So, which one of these pictures fit you? The one on the left or the right? Do you want to be the person that has the authority over the Bible? Do you want to be able to say, I decide what parts of this Bible are real or not real, or important or not important, that I follow or I don't follow? Or are you willing to be the one on the right-hand side where it says, I'm going to bow before God, and even though I may not like it all the time, even though it may not make sense to me all the time, even though other people will challenge me about this, I'm going to let God's word be the authority in my life. And I'll bow the knee now, not just later on. See, what the guys up here were singing is so right. It's still good news. Okay? Generation after generation, cultures, places, times, centuries, it doesn't matter. God's word is eternal. It is beyond time. It's beyond place. It's for everyone, everywhere, and that includes you and me. Jesus came to give us life. And he gave us that life once and for all on the cross. But he gives us life every single day through his word. Okay? So let God's word be your highest authority in life. Authority over anything else. And when you do, you're going to enjoy God better and glorify him better. What more can we ask? Let's pray.